My name is Mark LaFramboise. I'm one of the buyers here at Politics Prose. It's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our staff and our owners. And before we get down to business, a couple of things. If you've got a cell phone in your pocket, could you please take it out and turn off the ringer? It's really, really, really appreciated. They can yell. Hey, Saul. Also, on the front tables, there are Steve Goodman CDs and a fantastic DVD of Steve Goodman live at Austin, from Austin City Limits. Tom Paxton CDs, a Tom Paxton songbook, and of course, the reason we're all here tonight, Clay Eel's biography of Steve Goodman. So those are up on the front table, opposite the front door, all for sale. After the program, after Tom plays and Saul plays and Clay talks and all that, we will open it up for questions at the microphone right here. We insist to use the audience mic because we do record our events, and if it's as good as I think it is, everybody's going to want a recording. We only charge $7.5 for them, but you'll probably want one. But it'll make the recording that much better if you can actually hear the question before they answer it. So do use the audience mic. Get in line. If you know you have a question, get in line once the real program has ended, and then we'll conclude with Q&A like we always do here. Also, when we're done, if you do get a book, a song book or a CD or whatever you want, one of the authors or musicians to sign them, we'll have a line. It'll be going this way, depending on how long the line is, but it'll go this way and it'll commence here where they'll be sitting signing. Okay. We've got a great evening this evening. Thank you to Clay Eels for being the reason that we're here, celebrating the life and music of Steve Goodman. We are especially blessed tonight, especially fortunate that he's convinced Tom Paxton and Saul Broudy to come over here and play Steve Goodman's songs. I will let him introduce them. I will let him introduce them. And let me just say, when you look at this book and you see the work that's gone into it, Clay spent at least 8 years of his life working on this book, and you can tell by the number of interviews, everybody from John Prine, Jackson Brown, Steve Martin, Hillary Rodham Clinton. He really turned over every stone, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Clay Eels and turn the microphone over to him, and I'm looking forward to a great evening, as I'm sure you are too. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to Politics Prose. When you write a book about a musician, it's just wonderful to be able to have music at the event. That way you don't have to listen to me the whole time. And so to get you in the mood right away, we're going to give you a taste, just a taste of the song. Tom? Saul?
Riding on the city of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday morning mail. 15 cars, 15 restless riders, 3 conductors, 25 sacks of mail. On southbound Odyssey, train pulls out of Kankakee, rolling along past houses, farms, and fields, passing trains that have no name, freight yards full of old black men, and the graveyard of the rusted automobile. Good morning, America, how are you? Said, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train called City of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done.
It's hard to end in the middle of that song, I know, but be assured that we're going to get to the whole thing at the end. You can know what to look forward to at the end. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, all of you, for coming. This is overwhelming to me, this turnout, and I knew, well, you know, Goodman people are everywhere. And this proves it, you know. I mean, but it's not the only time I've had this happen. You don't know how amazing this all is to me. I'm still on cloud 10, you know. I mean, the response to this book has been phenomenal. I want to first kind of give you an idea of the demographics in the room. I kind of took a little survey beforehand, and I know that some of you didn't commute from Chicago, but can I see the hands of people who are from Chicago or Illinois here one time in your life or another? All right, all right. And and you know, we can count the Milwaukee people too. I mean, that's close enough. Madison? Oh yeah, oh yeah. But there are Goodman people everywhere, and we, oh my, here in DC, Goodman had a huge following. How many here actually saw Goodman perform live sometime in your life? All right. Now, how many here saw him perform in DC? At the Cellar Door? How about at the Bayou? How about at the Birchmere? So we've got a real...
It's an older crowd. Most of them saw them at the Cellar Door.
Oh man, there are constituencies all over the place for Goodman because Goodman was everybody. Goodman was everywhere. I mean, how many of you have heard of the Emil Verbin Society? Huh? Some of you may be members. This is a sort of an obscure, non-obscure group based here in this area of Chicago Cub fans. And this very obscure Chicago Cub named Emil Verbin. And Steve Goodman was a member of this group. You know, you had to be picked. It was hard to join. You had to be picked. Hillary Clinton was a member of this group, and I think its membership is closed off at this point. They hold secret meetings, but they still. David Broder, George Will. This is a group of names. I want to tell you that your instincts here are following the instincts of the rest of the nation. The press on this book has been phenomenal. I mean, first of all, I got to tell you, I mean, what publisher in their right mind would do a book on somebody who's not a household name? I tell you, I have about 75, 80 rejection letters in my file, and when they don't send you a form letter, the quote, you know, it's almost uniform, like they got all together and agree on this, and they said, we love your proposal, we love your sample chapters, but Steve Goodman is not well enough known to take a chance on. And I've got to salute my publisher, ECW Press of Toronto. They're not Random House, but they do a diverse group of books, and they not only took a chance on Goodman, but they gave me the book that I wanted. I mean, 800 pages, 547 photos, 4,700 index references, 400,000 words, a CD in the back. That alone is a story. I mean, Goodman is has such, his fingers reached everywhere that when I was interviewing people, they invariably, somebody would say, there's somebody that has a demo track that they recorded. After Goodman died, they wrote a song and they recorded it. And or there's an obscure song on a CD, and I thought, okay, good. I'll mention that in the back of the book, the chapter that talks about how Steve Goodman's music lives on. And it got to be 2, 3, 5, and after a while it was more than 25 songs that were either written for Goodman or mentioned him significantly. And I thought, I got to do something about this. And the idea that was natural was a CD, and this CD has 18 musical tracks on it. I mean, what other artist do you know who's inspired that kind of an outpouring? And the artists gave me the tracks for the book. I mean, that's how much they revered Goodman. I mean, so this book is huge in every way. I mean, it's 4 pounds, not including the hand truck. If you get 2, you have the barbell approach here. Now, the nice thing about an author event, I've learned a lot in the last couple months, and an author reading goes infinitely better the less reading that the author does. So that's why we've got music here, and I want to give special note to the 2 people whom you're going to hear from throughout tonight, because These are not just people who were influenced by Goodman, but they knew Goodman. They were the real deal. And I am so honored to have you both here. I'm going to start with you, Saul. Anybody here remember the album Jesse's Jig? Anybody remember the Jesse's Jig instrumental? Do you remember the song Spoon River? Do you remember the song Looking for Trouble? Do you remember the instrument that really made the production of those songs sing? And that's the harmonica, and Saul Broudy is the guy behind that. It was so good that Playboy magazine even said it was great, named him, you know? And of all, I interviewed 1,067 people for this book. I mean, it's a journalist's blessing, but it's also a nightmare, because I get, and you know, one of the worst perpetrators is sitting right next to me here. You get to the end of an interview and they say, well, you got to interview X, Y, Z, you know, and that's great. Journalists love that, you know, because there might be something behind door number 3, right? There might be a good story there. But when everybody does that for you, it fans out like this chain letter, and when you stop. But you know who my first source was? The first person I interviewed, it was Saul Broudy. He's the definition of networking. He got me started. And Saul came to Seattle for some gigs in the summer, or the fall of '98. He needed a place to stay, and I was on the Goodman email list. There is such a thing.
Chicago Shorty.
Chicago Shorty, just look that up on the net. You can get on it too. And Saul stayed with us for a week or two and let me know about something called the World Folk Music Association, which was planning a tribute to Steve Goodman here, almost here, in Alexandria at the New Birchmere, in January of '99. Now keep that in mind, 1999. They do a tribute every year, and this one was to Goodman, and they called it The 20th Century is Almost Over. And Saul got me to come, and he introduced me to a variety of people, including this gentleman here, who needs no introduction, Tom Paxton, but he has definite, direct connections with Goodman. And I interviewed Tom the very day after the conference came over. He agreed to meet me at the Holiday Inn the day after the conference, and I was so tired after that. I met him in the lobby, and I was sitting in the chair in the lobby, and then all of a sudden, the next thing I know is there's somebody waking me up and saying, "Are you Clay Heels?" I had fallen asleep. Tom, I'm so glad that you're here too. We're going to go back and forth between talking and songs, and Tom has some real gems for you tonight. Now, undoubtedly, there's some Goodman songs that you're not going to hear tonight. Each event that I've been doing has been different because the musicians know different songs and have different connections. But I promise you the ones you're going to hear tonight are a real treat. And let me introduce this first song by telling you that well, most of you don't need to hear this, but Goodman was a master songcrafter. And he was a songwriter that a journalist can really appreciate, because he said more than once, he said, you know, I can't really make up something. I got to see it first, and then I can really recreate it. And so many sources told me that the key to his success of his songwriting was the specificity. How many here remember, there's Chicago people, remember Ray Nordstrand of the Midnight Special, the late Ray Nordstrand. He told me that was the key. He was so specific that he could create a picture in your mind of what he was talking about, and he was describing things in such a down-to-earth way that anybody could relate to it. His songs, a lot of singer-songwriter stuff, and folk songs, some of them are very metaphorical. Not Goodman. Goodman was down-to-earth as it gets. And he could do that with funny songs. He could write the funniest songs you could ever, that's what got him into the Bourbon Society, really, was the Dying Cup fans' last request. He could write the most romantic songs you'd ever heard. One of the reasons that I felt that I had to do this book is that in the 70s I had his albums and I got to see him perform a couple of times, but then I wooed my wife with his songs. I sent her tapes. And it must have worked, because in May we just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. She's back in Seattle now, but she's been to a lot of these events already. She needs a break from me. But this this ability to write songs, you know, funny songs, romantic songs, social commentary songs. And sometimes they got all wrapped up in the same thing. In the same song, you'd have all three things or even more. And the irony is that the specificity, think about this. On the surface, your logic would say if something's so specific, if you can see it in your mind, it's just that one thing, right? But the grand irony of it, and Tom knows this all too well, is that the more specific you get, the more universal you get. The more that you get a picture in your mind, the more that you can apply it to your own life and have your own emotions about it. It's the same way with good writing. You know, if you can see it, then you're more riveted to it. And the song that that you're about to hear from Tom is the same song that he performed at the Birchmere in 1999 that I heard him perform at the Goodman tribute. And I could introduce, if I want to say something more about it, I'll do it afterwards. Please welcome Tom Paxton with My Old Man.
I was born in Chicago, lived there till I was 10, and speaking of the Cub fans, we were Cub fans, although we lived on the south side. I can't imagine why that was, but we were Cub fans, and I like to tell people that it was as a young man in Chicago that I learned that to be a Cub fan is, in Isaiah's words, to be a person of sorrow and acquainted with grief. But it is something that doesn't leave you, is it? Now, Steve Goodman was and remains on my top 5 favorite live performers I've ever seen. I saw Elvis in 1957 in Oklahoma City. Steve belonged on the same stage with him. I've never seen anyone with the energy that Steve brought to the stage. He kind of created his own weather system up there. I remember once in Milwaukee during the summer, there's a summer fest that they have down by the lake there, and I had done my little bit, and then I sat down at the side of the stage while Steve did his. And I was no farther away than people in the first row here from him. And I just sat there really drinking it in, because he did the whole set basically on his tiptoes. He just couldn't contain the energy. And I've never forgotten that for his encore, he came back and did a note for note perfect version of My Prayer. Who was it who had the hit of that back in the 50s? Who?
The Platters.
The Platters and My Prayer, complete with the falsetto at the end. It was just phenomenal. Well, this song of Steve's is anything but in that mood. It's a song of pure love for his father, called My Old Man. I miss my old man tonight. I wish he was here with me, with his corny jokes and his cheap cigar, to look you in the eye and sell you a car. That's not an easy thing to do, but no one ever knew a more charming creature on this earth than my old man. I don't usually interrupt a song, but I have to tell you that in my opinion, this next verse, one of the most perfect verses I've ever heard. He was a pilot in the big war in the U.S. Army Air Corps, Fly C-47 with a heavy load, with combat cargo for the Burma Road. And after they dropped the bomb, he came home and married Mom. And not long after that, he was mine. And oh, the fights we had when my brother and I got him mad. He'd get all boiled up and he'd start to shout, and I tuned him out. I knew what was coming, so I turned him out. And now the old man's gone, I'd give everything I own to hear what he said when I wasn't listening to mine. I miss my old man tonight. I can almost see his face. He was always trying to watch his weight. His hard only made it to 58. For the first time since he died, late last night I cried. Wondered when I was gonna do that. Wondered when I was gonna do that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. You know, Tom mentioned My Prayer. I'm going to go back to that Jesse's Jig album. Often Goodman, you know, what in my research, it wasn't just interviewing people or going blind at the microfilm machine. I collected tapes. Thanks. I hope this is not blasphemy, Tom, but thank goodness for the people who hid their tape recorders beneath their legs in all those concerts. It's excellent research material, particularly in Goodman's case, because he talked a lot between songs, and his song that was I can't sleep if I can't sleep with you. He started the song with the chords from My Prayer. He said I stole them from there. You know. Goodman, oh man, Goodman. You know, I've talked a little about his songwriting, and you've got a little taste of that now. But as good as a songwriter as he was a master interpreter of songs, and you could see this from his very youth. You know, in the book I go into the fact that he was a star temple singer. At age 8, he was singing for 300 to 400 people. Sometimes 2 or 3 bar mitzvahs racked up in a row on Saturday. This is the baby boom. Saturday morning, you know. And people came for the bar mitzvahs for sure, but they also came to hear Little Steve. I mean, little. I mean, he wasn't 5 feet. He didn't top out beyond 5'2" in his life, and he would come down the steps of the choir loft, and they'd lower the microphone, and he would do these solos in this Hebrew trained voice, cantor trained voice. And then he got into the guitar in high school, and in Chicago was a cornucopia of radio stations of styles, of blues, country, the barn dance, you know, that Jethro Burns played on, rock, everything. And Goodman, it was like that was his school. And he would soak up stuff. One of the best quotes I have is just a little 2-word quote is that Goodman had a phonographic memory. Which you know, he would get to hear a song just one time, even one with complicated verses, and he could play it back to you right away. And somehow he stored it all up here so that in his performances he could pull them out whenever he wanted. I mean, you would think he was just going somewhere with one song, but then he'd take off on a medley of old Temptations hits or old blues standards or whatever. Pop tunes, I mean, Lady Be Good, just and literally he wasn't planning this. He said there's a in the back, on the CD, there's a little bonus track that isn't advertised on the front of Goodman speaking, and he says, I wouldn't write a set of songs on my guitar for anything. Because what he tried to do was, I mean, the way he explained it, it's like a three-legged stool. There's songwriting, there's singing, and there's guitar playing, and I would bet there are people in this room who would say that he was the best at any or all of those three, but what he tried to do was to put the three together to be a sum of its parts, to be the best entertainer he could be. And as Tom alluded to, he ruined me for any other performer, I tell you. I see somebody now and it's like, yeah, they were great, but, and it's maddening in a sense. But he would go for performing in the moment. That was the idea, and so that's what made it so delicious, so wonderful when he would pull out a song, and you could see his mind working visually on it. You could see him pulling this out and saying, "Oh, well, this would be good here. This would be good here." And I'm going to lead to this next song, which is not his song, but Saul's going to play it for us. He's going to borrow Tom's guitar. And this is by a man who lived in Southern California, and he made a record album there, and he moved to Florida, and he made a bit of an impact there in the South Florida club scene in Atlanta, and then he moved to Detroit and had some success there, but he moved to Chicago. And the reason that he moved to Chicago was Steve Goodman, and some of you have already guessed. Who am I talking about? No, not John Prine. I'm talking about Michael Smith. And Michael Smith could not get steady work anywhere but in Chicago because of what Steve Goodman did for him with a song that is just such a gorgeous song and hands down the most beautiful studio recording Goodman ever made, called The Dutchman. Now, we're not going to hear The Dutchman tonight, but I'm bringing The Dutchman up so that you can know about Michael Smith. Michael Smith wrote the song we are going to hear, which is of equal gravity and equal emotion. And there's a connection to My Old Man, Tom, because before Goodman wrote My Old Man, there was about a 2-month period between the time his dad died and he wrote My Old Man. And because Goodman's parents had divorced and his dad had remarried, it fell to Steve to plan his dad's memorial service. And this was in Chicago at Pizer Funeral Home, and Steve and his brother David and his 2 stepbrothers planned the service. And imagine, there were more people in the room than we have here, and there was an empty chair up front and a guitar. And the way the memorial service went is that Steve walked up to the front, sat on the chair, picked up the guitar, and said, "This is my dad's favorite song." And he played The Dutchman, put the guitar down, and that was the end of the service. But this exemplifies how much regard not only Bud Goodman, but Steve had for Michael Smith. And this song is, well, it's set in the post-Civil War era. How many of you know Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River Anthology? I suspect a few of you know him. Michael Smith crafted this into one song, kind of summarizing all these stories, and it's post-Civil War, but I would suggest to you that it really applies to another wartime that we are in right now. Saul Broudy is going to do Spoon River for us.
At the risk of losing continuity here, I just want to say, since all these Chicagoans are in the audience, I spent a lot of time in Chicago in the 70s hanging out. I did 6 of what I think was 14 New Year's Eves at the Earl of Old Town that Goodman did. I did 6 of them, and it was the time of my life. I can't figure out what to do on New Year's Eve that will even come close to that nowadays. And this was in the 70s, and the time of my life I had in Chicago. I was the guy who, when somebody else's troubles closed at 2, I was walking down in the snow the 1.5 miles to North Avenue in Wells to hang out between 2 and 5 on Saturday night at the Earl of Old Town. So you probably saw me walking along there on Lincoln Ave. And if I got really frozen, I'd pop into the Laugh-In for an egg omelet. Is this ringing any bells?
Yeah.
Never mind. All of the riverboat gamblers are losing their shirts. All of the brave Union soldier boys sleep in the dirt. But you know, and I know, there never was reason to hurt. When all of our lives were entwined to begin with, here in Spoon River. All of the calico dresses, the gingham and lace, are up in the attic with grandfather's Derringer case. There's words whispered down in the hallway, a shadowy face. The morning is heavy with one more beginning here in Spoon River. Come to the dance, Mary Perkins, I like you right well. The Union's preserved. If you listen, you'll hear all the bells. There must be a heaven. The Lord knows I've seen mostly hell. My rig is outside, coming right through the morning here in Spoon River. All of the riverboat gamblers are losing their shirts. All of the brave Union soldier boys sleep in the dirt. All of the brave Union soldier boys sleep in the dirt. But you know, and I know, there never was reason to hurt. When all of our lives were entwined to begin with, here in Spoon River. Thank you.
Thank you, Saul. Thank you, Saul. Oh my. I want to take off on a comment somebody made. A couple people were guessing John Prine when I was asking about Michael Smith. Do we have any Prine fans in here? All right. Well, think for a moment. I think the key anecdote in this book, and it's been told probably not in this detail as before, but the key anecdote in this book has to do with Prine and Goodman. Think for a moment about the fact that none of us, any of us, may have known about Prine, really on a national scale, except for Steve Goodman. This is one of the things, one of the things that Tom told me about in my, 2 hours of interviewing him. One real big theme was Goodman's generosity. Generosity to his own detriment. Many of you know the Chris Christopherson, Paul Anka story, right? Now put those two guys together, what does they have anything to do with each other, right? Paul Anka, Diana, put your head on my shoulder. A musical generation earlier than Goodman, certainly. And he happened to be sitting on a plane next to Chris Christopherson, flying into Chicago. Anka was playing the very, very posh Palmer House in Chicago, doing his Vegas-style act. He had already written the Tonight Show theme and My Way for Frank Sinatra, and was taking the best songs he could to incorporate in his act. Meanwhile, Christopherson was flying in to play the Quiet Night, an upstairs club in Chicago, and Goodman was going to open for Christopherson. And Anka was thrilled to be sitting next to Christopherson because he wanted to thank him because he'd been incorporating the song Help Me Make It Through the Night into his act. And one night during this week-long run that they both had, Anka got done with his show earlier than Christopherson. At the Quiet Night, you had to do how many? 2, 3 shows? 3. And he came to the Quiet Night to see Christopherson. Came running up the stairs in his tuxedo, and soon he was on stage singing Help Me Make It Through the Night with Christopherson's band. And they got along pretty well that night, and Anka said, okay, I want to take you guys all out for breakfast. This is, late night, like 2 or 3 in the morning, and they invite him back to the Palmer House, to his suite, this huge suite with a big layout of food, and they're eating, and Christopherson, who really that week just became knocked out by Goodman and his songs, he leans over to Goodman, he says, take out your axe, I'd like you to play Anka, would you like to learn to dance? Anybody know that song?
Yeah.
Oh, and so Goodman plays the song, and Anka's first words out of his mouth are, how would you like a plane ticket to New York? And you're Steve Goodman. Your music is your life, and keep in mind, this is 1971. This is 2 years after he was told he wasn't going to live for but just a few months. He was given the death sentence of leukemia when he was just 20, and at those days, that was the dark ages of leukemia treatment. For bone marrow transplantation, they were still experimenting on dogs at that point. We tend to think that old medicine was way old, but not in this case. This was a huge chance for Goodman. And, Goodman, his approach to death and everything was to make light of it. He was self-deprecating and humorous to a fault. And his response is, how would you like a plane ticket to New York? Well, how would you like to see the short, fat Jewish kid dive into the vat of chicken Kiev? But then after the laughter died down, what would 99% of us say to an offer like that? Oh, gee, yes, Mr. Anka, thank you very much. Gosh, thanks for the opportunity. You know what he said? He said, if you think I'm good, you got to come hear my friend John Prine. And the very next night, the whole entourage went down to the Earl of Old Town very late. As Saul's alluding to, they were one of the later opening clubs in Chicago. Took the chairs off the tables, and Prine played his set. Christopherson made him play his set over again the second time, and Anka ended up buying 2 plane tickets to New York. And there is an ultimate irony in all of this, because in every measure of success, tangible measure, Prine took off way ahead of Goodman. He was, when they had their coming out party, not party, it was they came to New York, and Christopherson, just by coincidence, was playing The Bitter End, where we had an event 2 days ago at The Bitter End. It was wonderful. And Christopherson told Paul Colby, I want to bring these 2 guys on stage. And Paul Colby was, I'm not sure I want to do that because it'll lengthen the whole thing, and Christopherson insisted. And that night, Prine had an offer for a record contract. Goodman stayed around in New York for about 3 or 4 weeks, finally got his offer. And it was during those 3 or 4 weeks that he wrote that classic song, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going nowhere in a hurry blues. think that that was a little part of the inspiration there. But Prine went on to Atlantic and Goodman on Buddha, and Atlantic marketed him. He was the new Dylan, and he was this, you know, skinny, brooding looking, you know, I mean, and his first album really could be considered a greatest hits album in a sense. I mean, what a first album. Whereas Goodman's this short, stocky guy who's Mr. Joy on stage. That's not, you know, your matinee idol, basically. And Prine went on to sell many more records than Goodman. They often played together. They were billed together. It was always Goodman first, and Prine was the headliner. So generous to a fault. Generous to his head. He told he told one interview. How many of you, when there's a few of you, it looks like, might remember the Wild Bill Hickok show when you were kids?
Yes. Yeah.
Remember Guy Madison?
Yeah.
Name's Wild Bill Hickok, mister. And then who was his sidekick? Andy Devine. He was Jingles. Wait up for me, Wild Bill. Well, Goodman said he felt like he was Jingles to Prine's Wild Bill Hickok. And there was a lot of truth in that. Well, the reason I bring up Prine in relation to this next song is that not only did they perform together, they co-wrote together some classic songs together. We don't have time to go into all of that. But Goodman also rescued, Prine's albums kind of went downhill in the mid-'70s, and he rescued Prine from a sort of a musical fate worse than death by producing the album called Bruised Orange, which became an award-winning album. And Goodman really got into being a record producer. And he self-produced his albums on Asylum, and he produced other people's albums. And the man sitting next to me asked him to produce his album upon his very hopeful return from England to the States to his first album that came up. And I'm going to let you take it from here. This is a song from that album.
Steve and I got together, I guess it was about 76 or something. I went out to...
Early 78.
Was it? You want to argue? I don't want to argue. I did a date with Bonnie Colac. We played up at in Evanston at come on, Rain.
Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace.
No, the outdoor place. The huge place.
Ravinia.
Yeah, Ravinia. Thank you very much.
Highland Park.
Yeah, and I stayed over for a day to hang out with Steve, and we went back up to Ravinia the next night to see Christopherson and Rita Coolidge, and of course we wound up on stage. And I was content just to stand in the background and play together, but Steve had this look of utter glee as he played the songs with Christopherson and Rita Coolidge. It was kind of a benevolent kind of demonic. So I asked him if he would come to New York and co-produce an album I was going to do for Vanguard. It was all new material. Usually live albums you do old stuff, but it was a lot of new material, and Steve did the whole album with me. He played guitar, sang harmonies, and really made the album happen. It was called New Songs from the Briar Patch, and it's still one of my favorite albums. This is one of the songs from it about a musical influence on both of us. A wonderful old man named Mississippi John Hurt, who was rediscovered back in I think it was in '63, and had only 3 years of life left, but we should all live our last 3 years the way he did, making new friends and having wonderful audiences. And about 10 years after he left us, this song came to me. It was a frosty night, it was beginning to snow, and down the city streets the wind began to blow. We all came to the cellar, we all emptied the bar, to hear a little old feller play his shiny guitar. Did you hear John Hurt play the Creole bell, Spanish fandango that he loved so well? Did you love John Hurt? Did you shake his hand? Did you hear him sing his Candyman? Oh, did you hear him sing his Candyman? We're in 8. On a straight back chair with a felt hat on, he take a lot of fancies with his Avalon. And everybody passing down McDougal Street will cock their heads and listen to the tapping feet. Help us do it now. Did you hear John Hurt play the Creole bell? I played the Creole bell, Spanish fandango that he loved so well. Did you love John Hurt? Did you love John Hurt? Did you shake his hand? Did you shake his hand? Did you hear him sing his Candyman? Oh, did you hear him sing his Candyman? My Creole belle, I love her well. My darling baby, my Creole belle, when stars do shine, then she'll be mine. My darling baby, my Creole belle. It was a frosty night, it was beginning to snow, and down the city streets the wind began to blow. We all came to the cellar, we all emptied the bar, to hear a little old feller play a shiny guitar. Did you hear John Hurt play the Creole bell, Spanish fandango that he loved so well? Did you love John Hurt? And did you shake his hand? Did you hear him sing his Candyman? Did you hear him sing his Candyman?
What a one-of-a-kind night we have here. Thank you so much, Tom and Saul. You know, the theme, I mean, that's evinced by all of this is a regard for your musical elders, right? Right? And anybody remember the phrase, don't trust anybody over 30? That's the era we're talking about here. But Goodman was just the opposite. I mean, he drank this stuff in like a sponge, and he resurrected careers. Jethro Burns, you all know Homer and Jethro, probably from Cornflakes commercials, you know, back in the 60s on the Beverly Hillbillies. That's the way most of America remembers them. I mean, but they were just huge for 35 years. When Homer died, Jethro was just bereft. He didn't know where to go. He was teaching a few lessons in Evanston on mandolin, and as Goodman said, many times he was arguably the best mandolin player who ever lived. And he took Goodman out on tour for about 10 years. And there's a group. Yeah, did I say that?
You said it backwards.
You said it backwards. That
Jethro
took Goodman on tour.
Yeah, well, Goodman probably would have done that too. He always felt it was an honor, but you know what Jethro said in interviews was that he said his time with Goodman was much more satisfying than his time with Homer. Imagine that. Homer was like his brother. But he said, these new audiences, they dig my music, these young guys. You know, we were just comedy guys before, and they really get into the music. Martin, Bogan, and Armstrong, another good example. These guys in the late 20s were known as the Tennessee Chocolate Drops. This was an African-American string band. And they were revived in the 70s. Goodman produced one of their albums. They were just a fantastic amalgamation of, I mean, they were like Goodman personified in terms of their range of songs. And in doing this book, you know, I was trying to interview everybody I could who had some connection with Goodman. And, you know, Howard Armstrong was still alive. And I got to talk with him for more than an hour. When he was about 91, 92 years old, and he died a few years back at 95. What a guy, and his comments. There's so many voices in this book, and arguably the theme of this book is mortality. Speaking of death, I mean, we're all facing the music. Sometimes we live as though, you know, we take it for granted, but Goodman could never do that. There were people I wasn't able to interview because they were already gone, obviously. Jethro was one of them. And then there were people I interviewed who died before the book came out. Never got to see the book. Steve Berg, his mother came to the event at Philly last night. Steve Berg, a wonderful musician, died a couple of years ago. He was one of many people who cried when I interviewed them. I mean, the connection. I mean, think of somebody in your own life. We all have them. It doesn't have to be somebody who's dead. Somebody who you really connected with 20, 30, maybe even 40 years ago, and somehow your paths have diverged. And you maybe think of them every once in a while, but your thoughts are elsewhere, your lives are elsewhere. And then a guy comes along and says, well, I'm doing a book on this person. People's memories just flowed, and a lot of the celebrities you mentioned, Mark. I mean, they're used, like Hillary. I mean, they're all used to being interviewed about themselves, you know, and the same old questions, you know. So they get a chance to talk about Steve Goodman. You know, there are two kinds of people in the world. Did you know that? There's Steve who, and there's Steve Goodman, and there's nobody in between. I tell you, there's nobody in between. But people like Mimi Farina, she had metastasized lung cancer. She died about 6 months after I talked to her. She knew her time was short. She gave me an hour because of Steve Goodman. There was a guy, some of you may know, this crowd, there may be a few, a folk singer in New York named Justin Devereaux. 40 years ago, exactly 40 years ago, he was the one who taught Goodman how to really be successful at busking in Washington Square in Greenwich Village. And I interviewed him in his apartment, which was about as big as the travel section of the bookstore over here. And after an hour, I was packing up my stuff, and he says, "Write fast, I have cancer." What did he say? I mean, I had to trust that the people who talked with me knew that it would be of some value, whether or not they would still be around to see the finished product. And again, that's one of the Goodman life lessons. How many of you know the last song on Goodman's last album? You better get it while you can. If you wait too long, it'll all be gone, and you'll be sorry then. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It's the same for a woman or a man. From the cradle to the crypt, it's a mighty short trip, so you better get it while you can. And that's the way I felt about doing this book. I can't explain it, you know. I'm not a God person. I don't know why we're here. But for some, I felt like I was meant to do this book. Like, to the point where I feel like I can die a whole lot more easily now. I mean, that sounds morbid or strange or something, but this was, I mean, we all have someday projects, right? Is there anybody in here who doesn't have a someday project? Is there anybody here who believes that someday is going to come? I'll tell you what else is going to come, perhaps beforehand, and that lesson of what are we going to do with the limited time that we have. It's a powerful theme, and it doesn't just apply to baby boomers, I tell you. The nice thing about interviewing people about Goodman now is that most of the people I did interview are now in their late 50s and early 60s, and it's a more reflective time than when we're living the times of the 20s and 30s that I'm writing about in the book. And that kind of a tone is throughout the comments. It's a warm tone. I mean, this is not hagiography. There are warts. Goodman was not Steve Perfect Man. But it's our faults and our flaws that make us more human and our strengths more endearing. Anyway, this is a really special part of this program tonight because yes, I was able to include on a CD some songs that people wrote, but I also was able to include a poem by the guy sitting next to me here, and he's going to read it for you. And thank you, Tom, for letting me use it in the book.
I don't write a lot of poems. I always figure if it's written down, it ought to have melody and song. Saul mentioned Steve's handle, a little early, Chicago Shorty. That's what they called him down in Nashville. Nobody liked Steve down in Nashville. They loved him. They flat out loved Chicago Shorty. So this is what came out. Chicago Shorty would write you a song, and he'd play the damn thing all night long, make you coffee, fry you an egg, tickle your funny bone, pull your leg, talk your head off, laugh at your jokes, kiss your sister, and charm your folks. Lend you his house, lend you his car, give you the strings from his last guitar. Stevie'd let you name the place, meet your plane, and carry your case. Chicago Shorty lived his life, loved his children, loved his wife. He was a joy for me to know, and I'll miss the little bastard so.
Tom, I don't know if you heard Goodman say this publicly about you. But he would say in concerts and in interviews, he said, you know, Tom, Goodman, he would, it was hard to get Goodman to talk about himself. He'd talk about everybody else before himself, really. I mean, journalists complained about that. You know, you only have a certain amount of time for an interview. But when you, anyway, you bore down to him and they tried to get him to talk about his songwriting. And he said, you know, I'm really a lazy songwriter. You know, I mean, I don't believe it, but that's the way he put it. And he said, now you take a guy like Tom Paxton. Tom Paxton gets up in the morning, and his discipline is that he writes a song every morning before he does anything else. He can't go do anything else until he writes a song. And he says, well, let's say, you know, maybe only one song a week is really worth something. You know, maybe 6 out of the 7 aren't that great of songs, but think of those 50 songs that are left over. I told you I wasn't going to read much, but I can't resist this. I know that most of us here are sort of, you might call Goodman diehard. We're no pun intended. I mean, we know Goodman for Goodman. But if you really get honest about it, a lot of us, and really America as a whole, know Goodman because of a man named Arlo Guthrie. And in a sense, without Arlo, there would not be a Steve Goodman. Arlo put him on the map with the city of New Orleans, and we're going to get to the song. But think about it the other way. Without Goodman, there might not be an Arlo in the mainstream either. I mean, Arlo had done Alice's Restaurant. He kind of became this druggy star in Woodstock, but to the rest, to the mainstream of America, he was known as this hippie freak, and if he was known. And then along comes City of New Orleans, which was just a huge hit. You know, the fact that I think it was number 18 in the nation, that doesn't really say much about its real effect because it grew from the grassroots. It was not a song that, oh, Warner Brothers thought, this is a hit and we're going to promote the hell out of it. They didn't do that. This came from radio stations in the Atlanta area. And then it slowly spread, and by the time it spread, the initial boom, Warner Brothers was behind the curve on this one. And so it never really rose on the chart to the place that it really was or deserved. And as Arlo told me, you know, he couldn't buy a concert in the South before City of New Orleans. But then, he says, then I became a train guy. And I knew, you know, even from the beginning, I knew I had to have Arlo do the foreword of the book. Now, picture Arlo sitting down at a computer writing a foreword. It's just not going to happen. But you know as well as I do that he's a wonderful raconteur, a wonderful extemporaneous speaker from the stage and in person. Oh, you know, he's right up there in the top 5 of my more than 1,000 interviews. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. 2.5 hours at a Mexican restaurant in Louisville, Kentucky. And he took me there. I drove him there. He said, we got to go to this place because they serve vegetarian. I said, when did you turn vegetarian? He said, oh, about 3 years ago. This is 2000. I said, just trying to make conversation because I didn't want to interview him in the car. Couldn't take notes. He said, well, has anything changed? He says, yeah, people are less hostile to me. Now, what I decided to do was, instead of asking him to write a foreword, I thought, I had this wonderful interview transcript. I taped everything. And I thought, what I'll do is I'll put together his own words and send them to him, right? That would work. He'd like it because it sounded like him and it would fit. And 2 years ago, I did that. I got my publisher in the spring of '05, and not long after that, I sent him what I wanted to have as the foreword, because then I had the publisher, things were in motion, a lot better. Didn't hear. I sent it to him again, didn't hear. I emailed it to him, didn't hear. I called and said, left messages, they said they'd get back to me, didn't hear. I didn't bug him every day, but you know, periodically, and then the deadline, last December, the deadline was getting down to the brass knuckles, you know. And then a source in Massachusetts said, you know, Arlo's wife Jackie has put some video up on YouTube. Why don't you email Jackie? This was a Sunday night. I thought, okay, got to try everything. I emailed Jackie, attached the foreword. Half hour later, bing, the reply, it says, Arlo says yes. It's the power of the spouse, I'll tell you. There's a lesson there. Now, what I'm going to be reading to you, 2 things I want you to keep in mind. One is, this is not written. This is Arlo talking. This is how articulate the guy is, seriously. And the other thing is, this is all, it sets a wonderful tone for the book. It's about mortality. And many of you know, but I just want you to put it together side by side with Goodman. He had the same kinds of angst, if you will, about his own life. He did not know until he lived his own life whether he was going to